Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Queerness Diaries. I'm very excited to be back again this week with another episode. And you can see on the other end of the camera, I'm joined all the way from over in the States today. So I'm very excited to have you here today, Caro, on the podcast.
Hello.
And it's your very first podcast as well, right?
It is. It is.
Oh, well, I'm really happy to have you. So excited and to get to delve in as well today to your story and to hear about all of your wonderful chapters. Like we were saying before we started rolling, always like it to feel super easygoing and really happy to have you. So thank you for joining me today on the pod.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I so appreciate it.
Yeah, it's fantastic getting to chat to you today. And before we kind of get rolling, because we're going to go into your story all the way from chapter one and get to hear all the fantastic chapters about your life. But if you could just give a brief introduction just for all of our listeners to get to know you.
About me, okay. I am a writer. I am a chiropractor by trade. I am a mother and a wife. Um, my wife and I have been together for 20 years this year, and we have a 15-year-old daughter who thinks like all 15-year-old daughters are. They're just like, "Ugh, Mom." Um, so I keep pretty busy. I have written 4 books. This is my first one that has been published, and then I have another one in the pipeline, which is kind of cool. This book was a deathbed promise that I made to my grandmother when I was my daughter's age. When I was 15, she asked if I would ever write about her, and I said, "You've never done anything." And of all of the things I wish I had never said, I could just kick myself. Um, in my mind at that time, I didn't feel like she was scholarly or worldly, or I felt like she was held down, kept barefoot and pregnant, and just had kids. And at that time, that didn't seem very important to me. So when she died, I realized that I had tried to live my life opposite of her. I was young and gay, and I was going to go out and just grab that brass ring of the world and run around with it. And then she
Yeah,
died, and I realized the importance of what she had to offer, as well as
yeah.
the other stuff, and the nice way that nowadays we can blend those together.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think it's such a special, unique relationship that so many of us can relate to with a grandparent as well. It's like I always think like even with my grandmother, she's 87 and we couldn't be any more different, but there's just like this common bond that we've shared throughout our life. And I think I imagine for you as well, it's like you find more things out about someone you think you knew, and you find there's so much more to their story than
Sure.
we're so used to, what we think we know about someone. But there's so much history, there's so much storytelling, there's so many different parts of someone, and it's like it's amazing what you can kind of uncover, isn't it?
It is. It is. And when my grandmother died, um, she had been kind of in a rough marriage, rough, like emotionally abusive and kind of kept down. And all of us wondered, well, God, why did she choose him?
Mm,
And we do know she chose him because he had curly hair, and that's all she ever wanted for her children.
yeah,
And I was like, well, could there be more? There must be more than just curly hair and he could dance. So that's
yeah,
what we were trying to uncover. And, some things we won't uncover because we didn't get to ask her. We didn't think to ask her when she was alive, you know.
yeah,
But it's
yeah.
crazy how those things kind of mold who we are as a person, the negative things, the positive things, or even the subtle things that you don't notice.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think sometimes life just goes by and we don't realize there's so many different things that shape us very unknowingly or subconsciously. And
Mhm.
it's only when you kind of unpack your story and take the time to really go into it that it's like, oh yeah, all these things had significance. It's just we're so busy sometimes with the next thing that's coming, the next
Yeah.
event, catching up with friend, whatever it is, that we get
Yeah.
so caught up and lost in things. But we all have a story, and it's easy to forget that sometimes with how busy and fast track our life can be.
Sure. And that's the great thing about writing it down, because then one, you remember, and then someone else can get to know a little bit more
Yeah,
about your inner world. And I've been
yeah,
kind of surprised at how many of my close friends have read the book. And then they're like,
yeah,
I just feel like I know you so much more now, so much more, deeply. And I think,
yeah.
that vulnerability of writing and just really exposing more of our core, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's such a power to storytelling as well. It's like amazing the connections that it can bring. I imagine for you, you've had probably a lot of people reach out saying, I really relate to this with the relationship with my grandmother or even a different family member. It's like storytelling has such a unique emotional power that just those words can resonate. And when you're writing them down, sometimes I imagine, you think, well, no one's gonna be able to relate exactly to my story because it's my story, or even if it's about another person. But then someone pops up and they've got, something similar, and then before you know it, you've got so many other people that are reaching out and they're talking about their own unique experiences, but often there's a common thread, and they find that through the storytelling aspects.
Well, and I was also amazed at that too, that, we're all so different.
Mhm.
But when we look at the core of all of ourselves, there are some really common themes,
Yeah,
whether it's you or me or the guy down the street or the guy in Africa or whatever. We all
yeah,
have these similar, I don't want to say passions, but just like things that matter, things that really make us who we are, things that make us better people and make us empathetic to others. And
yeah,
it's been really neat to see the readers coming up with that and being like, I had a closeness with my grandmother and this is how it molded me. And it's just been really rewarding to hear those kind of stories, about
yeah.
how connected we all are. Because sometimes, and especially like with news and social media, it almost feels like they're trying to disconnect us.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, especially in the world right now. I think there's so much going on and there's so much noise that sometimes it's nice to just feel like you're having a real story, a real person in front of you, and you can really invest into that because especially with the social media world as well, there's so many different sources and bits of information coming at us, and it's easy when that happens, I think, to just get a little bit lost in it sometimes because the world is so busy. And
Yeah.
having, that time to read a book, to write, to keep a diary, whatever it is that someone uses for their free time, it can be a very powerful experience to just get out the emotion and the thoughts, and for the reader as well to really invest in something away from all that noise and have something that for them in that moment makes them think about real relationships, how it relates to them. And I think that's why, those authentic stories always shine through.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to say real stories matter.
Yeah, so
And not
true.
that all the stories out there aren't real, but sometimes you don't know.
Yeah,
And it's nice to get to that core and get to that heart and get to that. And sometimes it's even pain, that pain, but
yeah,
that pain that we all share, that
yeah,
grit,
yeah,
and that's just, I think, the awesomeness of writing and being able to tell it in a way that it is relatable.
yeah, definitely. And I
Yeah.
think, those um even if some pages of our own stories are painful and there's hardships, they all add to our personal diaries in the end and shape things along the way, the ups and downs that sort of create our own stories. But I kind of wanted to go into your own story as well. If we had to imagine we're going into your diary, chapter one for you, how does your story begin? Where did you grow up? And so, yeah, to kind of take our listeners through the journey about how your story begins.
Okay. Well, my story begins a little differently from the book story, but I was raised in Massachusetts, which is a town in New England, in the United States. And I was raised in a very small house with my mother and my father, and then my grandmother lived with us.
Yeah.
And my parents took care of her because she had had a nervous breakdown in 1957. So she was very she was capable, but had a childlike heart, which to
Yeah.
a child like me was really awesome because she was like having just like my best friend there all the time.
Yeah.
Um, we slept in the same bed until I was 9. We would get into shenanigans together. Like we'd sneak out of the house and walk to Dunkin' Donuts and not tell my sister. And she was she had this really she had this really magical way of making every person feel like they were the most important person. So if
Yeah.
I was with her, I was the most important. But if she was with my sister or my mother or one of my aunts, she could also make them feel that too. So we grew up fairly poor. We had one car, and we lived in a little cottage,
Yeah.
but it felt rich because there was so much love and there was so much joy and there was so much support.
Yeah.
So I never felt like I lacked anything. And so I grew up like that. And can we pause for 1 second?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, of course. I can just don't worry, I can just edit
Okay.
with any pauses, so no
Okay.
problem.
Um, is that enough of growing up?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I always
Okay.
say it's fantastic to have. Yeah, I think that's lovely as well, the relationship you had with family, because it's like you said, they add so much warmth to those early chapters when you can look back fondly on those memories.
Yeah. Okay. I felt like I was going down a rabbit hole there. I'm like, okay, the audience is going to start sleeping right now. So,
No, I think that was great. Yeah, I think that was fantastic. But yeah, that's perfect for that. Let me know when you're ready, and then we can continue
okay.
that.
Are you going to ask me another question or?
I think you kind of stopped in the middle of that. So if you just kind of finish off
Okay,
that
I'll
part, and then
finish.
we'll
I'll
go
finish.
into the writing
Okay.
part. Let me know when you're ready, and then I'll
I
just
am
make a little
ready.
note. So I'll just make a note on the time of the recording. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Right.
So, because I was raised rather poor, I felt like I wanted to go out and get an education and ensure that no one could lay me off or fire me or, because I saw that struggle within my family. Both of my parents, um, they were very hard workers, but they didn't have a college education. And I saw them struggle just as they got older in life, being able to keep a job when young college grads came out. So I decided, I'm going to go. I'm going to get an education. I'm going to make
Yeah.
sure that doesn't happen to me. And when I went down to Atlanta, Georgia, because there was a chiropractic school there.
Yeah.
Um, that was the first time I think I broke my grandmother's heart, because in her perfect world, we all live on the same street. We
Yeah.
don't, we meet for supper on Sundays. We have tea and toast at the kitchen table every day.
Yeah.
And part of me, part of me felt like I had to get away so I could see who I was without
Yeah.
them. And get an education too. But there was, the young and gay and not sure how that would mesh, in a small
Yeah.
town in Massachusetts. So it was kind of multifaceted. And I promised her I would come back in 5 years. And 5 years turned into 10 years, turned into 15 years. And
Yeah.
I never moved back there. And that was my guilt. Every time I
Yeah.
would come home and visit, and she'd say, "Don't you just miss Tewksbury?" And really,
Yeah.
it was like she was saying, "Well, don't you love me enough to come back home?" She didn't
Yeah.
say that, but it was implied, and I don't know. I never
Yeah.
really
I
wanted to
understand.
move back there. I wanted to be close, but I didn't want to move back there. So that was always like my internal struggle.
Yeah.
So as my life progressed here, she aged and finally she died. This was kind of my keeping my promise to her that, your life mattered, your story mattered, our relationship really mattered, and I'm going to put it out there for the world to see,
Yeah.
because it mattered. Yeah.
Yeah.
So So that's where we are right now.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful promise to make though, and to have that bond as well. It's because it is difficult when you're navigating, a small town life and wanting to find yourself as well, and then you've got family members back home still in that town, and it's like the conflicting feelings. I've been there
Uh-huh.
myself when I first moved away as well. It's like you feel that guilt, but then you're wanting to find yourself, and it's at the same time not understanding where you are in your own journey. And then you
Sure.
speak to people back home, and it's like you get those phone calls like, when are you coming home? When are you coming to visit? And you visit, and it's like, are you sure you're happy there? It's like they want a piece of you. I think it's hard, as hard as it is for us sometimes to leave. We don't realize how much they miss us when we go. And I think they understand eventually, whether it's parents, grandparents, um, but it's definitely still hard for them at the same time. I remember I grappled with the guilt a lot the first year I moved to Madrid. I was like, well, if it doesn't work out, I'll just go back to the UK. And I remember my mom as well would always say, well, you can just, if it doesn't work out, just come back home. But I think sometimes we have to be, don't we, on that journey. We don't know where we're going, where the destination is, but we have to be finding ourselves, whatever that means to us. And it becomes very important. And sometimes we end up going back. Sometimes we never go back. Everyone's story is different, but we have to go through that process.
And it's an important process. And, even though I didn't realize this as I was writing the book, but by the end of the book and the more I've, had to come up with a pitch and all these things about it, I realized that I felt like my grandmother never got to go through that process. And I feel like she was stifled, and being so close to her growing up, I'm like, you got to let me free.
Yeah.
Um, and and that's still, I mean, she died 15 years ago, and there's still that guilt in there that it wasn't enough. My best wasn't enough. So hopefully, like this is a good enough promise to her, and she's happy up there wherever she is, looking
Yeah.
down, and I'm making sure her legacy lives on.
Yeah, yeah, it's a real labor of love, and it's such a powerful thing to do for someone, and such an amazing thing to do to bring, their story to life, but forever, because now it's out in the world, and people, I imagine, keep finding it all the time. You'll have people pop up all over the world saying, "Hey, I just purchased this book, and it really resonated with me." And
Yeah.
you imagine how proud she would be to know that her story is now reaching new people every week, connecting with their
Yeah.
stories, with their journeys that they're on as well. It's such, like we said at the beginning, such a powerful thing in authentic storytelling.
Mm. I think there's been I think the story allows a lot of healing with people. I found like a lot of mature women uh, hope that their grandchildren see them that way, and just hope that those relationships get nourished in that way. And I think the reason that my grandmother resonated so well is that she wasn't pushy. She wasn't going to like force her way in. She was really like under the radar, you know, with her positive words, with her, just with whatever she said. She was never like in your face about it. And
Yeah.
as an adult, I've kind of taken on that too. When I have to go against something uncomfortable, I'm not going to like just, pound my way in. I'm just going to kind of go in gently, and that has
Yeah.
really resonated with me. And I think that's kind of one of the common themes in the book that people really resonate with too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for people, to find those emotional connections, it's so important in the power of the words and people's stories. And I always say, it's like we said before, there's so much noise out there in the world, but being able to have that time to invest in a story and that imagination that it can take you on that journey in your own mind, because you start thinking back to different memories that you have, with even with this a grandparent or someone else that they might relate it to. And it's like there's experiences that, although they're unique to each of us, those commonalities still exist with the emotional pull and the connection. And so it's for me, especially when it comes to reading, it's just nice sometimes with all the noise in the world to just have an hour or two in the evening to just drift away into this imaginary wonderland sometimes and just pull back on different memories I've had through life and different relationships with people. So I imagine for you as a writer to see all these people popping up with their stories, experiences, what they've taken away from the book must be very powerful as well.
It is powerful. Um, and it's powerful because you don't always realize the impact it's going to have, you know. And I've been most surprised. I assumed that my reader was going to be all women, and I have been so stunned at how many men have read my book and come to me. And I had one yesterday in my office. He's like, I grabbed your book and I put on my bathrobe and I sat in my chair and I read the whole thing in one day. And he's like, it brought back so many memories of his childhood in Chicago. And some people, like, repressed memories have come back, and it's brought a lot of joy and
Yeah,
warmth and I don't nice feelings.
yeah,
And I think that I was raised with stories about my grandfather being very harsh, and a lot of the stories coming back from the men who are reading my book are very soft and warm, and it's really, oh, it's so great. I love it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's, like you said, all these people reach out and you write it, I imagine when you were writing it, it's one thing to write it, but to have it go out into the world, there's probably a bit of a nervous process too, right, at first, because it's almost like your own baby, I imagine, with a book, and
Yeah.
then suddenly it's with the world. There must be
Yeah.
like a lot of emotions that go through that at first, but then once you sort of release that, there's so much that can come from it. Because, like you said, you've had all these even unexpected audiences reach out, and they keep reaching
Yeah.
out all the time.
Well, I think memoir writing for sure, any writing, but
Yeah,
specifically with memoir, it's very vulnerable, and
yeah,
it's very close, and it's when you put it out there, of course you want people to like it, but then there are some that don't, you know. Um, I've had a couple family members that I thought would be thrilled with it, and they were just like, I can't believe you put that in the book. I'm like, oh, sorry, um,
yeah,
but I would say for the most part, it's really been very loving, and it's been a great experience. As nervous as I was to put it out there, because you're right. Once it's out there, it's out there. Yeah.
yeah. But it's something to be so proud of, though, to have that out and to know that you did it with such a labor of love and to, see that it's connecting with so many people now. I imagine as a writer, it gives you so much inspiration for the future as well, because I think it's always hard when it's like just getting everything together, thinking of the
Mhm.
name, the process, and getting it out there. But once it's done once, and there's more stories out there, and then the next book, and then the next, it just gets a little bit easier.
It
And
does.
there's so many different journeys it can take you on in the future.
For sure, for sure. Um, I think that writing this memoir was really my journey through grief and how I was going to cope with my life before my grandmother died and my life after my grandmother died. In the end, we decided to have a baby and we named her after my grandmother. So I felt like my wife and I could really raise a child in an alternative family, but with all of the love and the support that my family and her family, gave us together. So it was
Yes.
kind of cool and healing like that. Um, I think that any story, takes you through a certain arc And then
Yeah.
when you get to the end of the story, there's a new arc that begins.
Yeah.
So it's just
Very.
it's kind of neat to see how you come full circle with things. And by the end of the story, um, I was okay with my grandmother's passing because I realized, she had lived her life, she had completed her job, she had done her work, and it was her time. Where at the
Yeah.
beginning, I was just so shocked, I couldn't believe it. How are we going to deal with this? And so it was very
Yeah.
healing for me, and it was very therapeutic for me to go through that process. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine because there is such an emotional weight when it comes to any sort of creative outlet, and especially with writing. It's like it's one thing to have it in our minds, but to be able to have the power of words to get, that pen to paper, it can be, like you said, a very therapeutic process. And sometimes we'll learn things about ourselves through the process that
Yes.
surprise us as well. Was there anything that you kind of learned about yourself through writing the book that kind of surprised you?
So I don't think I realized, I don't think I realized that I was trying to live opposite of her. We were super close when I was little, and I heard all of these great stories about my family, but I also heard these not so great stories about
Yeah.
my grandfather and their poverty and their limitations in my mind. But I never really thought, I just did a complete 180 and pivoted the other way. But as I was writing the book, I'm like, oh, that looks like exactly what I did. I'm like, um,
Yeah.
so when when I got to that level, when I realized that, then I could have more empathy for her. As I realized, oh wow, that must have been very painful for her. For me not to just leave, but in her mind, I just left. Um, and even when you come home and visit, it's not the same as having tea and toast every morning.
Yeah.
But it was something I had to do. So, writing the whole book, I did learn a lot of things about myself, and then I was also able to come up with things that I wanted to keep changing about myself and going in a new direction. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the awesome things about writing and just really self-discovery as you're being so vulnerable and putting stuff out there.
Yeah, 100%. I think that is where, for the readers, it will really connect as well, having that authenticity because people, it sounds like such a cliche thing to say, but people want the real stories, they want to really delve in and really read about the emotions and go on those journeys and think about those memories and how it relates to their own relationships because like we said before, there's so much going on in the world, and to have, a story like this, it's nice to have that disconnect from the world outside and be able to go on a journey through memory lane, immerse ourselves, and discover even things about ourselves through reading that sometimes happens, things that we look back and think about things from our own journeys that maybe in day-to-day life in the busyness we don't normally do. But sometimes you'll be reading, in a story and get lost in a chapter and think how it relates. And it can make you realize things about your own personality or a relationship with someone. And so I think that's why storytelling always has such a big grip on people in the end.
For sure, for sure. Um, my grandmother had four daughters, and my mom's the youngest of the four daughters, and they were poor, so they didn't have vacations. So they would go to the beach as part of their summer break, and they would take a bus and a train, and they'd walk a mile, and they'd drag all these chairs and lunch. And I would interview my mother and my three aunts, and coming up with this story about how all of them made this big effort to get to the beach, and then the appreciation of the beach, and how that beach looked in 1957. Um,
Yeah.
was really really cool. And then in the second chapter, I fly home to Boston, and my dad and I drive to that beach, and it's so different from how
Yeah.
I experienced it in my mind through their storytelling.
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
kind of neat to be able to kind of bring those two worlds together. My own disappointment that, oh, it wasn't this magical place in my head, but this is what it is now. And And it's kind of cool seeing it through someone else's eyes.
Yeah, 100%. And I think as well, like through someone else's eyes, it just in our minds, it can take us on such a journey that we imagine things completely different sometimes, but it doesn't have to be like a disappointment in a sense. It's nice sometimes to get lost, isn't it, in sort of that
Sure.
imagination. And I think, sometimes to even my own grandma's stories that she tells me she loves to just sit in a chair and just talk about completely random stories, whether it's, how she used to go down on the steam train to meet my grandfather when she was only 17, 18. And I just imagine in my head what it was like, but it was probably completely different for her. But it's nice to imagine, isn't it, those things?
Yeah. Yeah. And especially now, because like our lives are so different from that, Here we are talking on a phone, where
I
that wasn't even a
know.
choice back then.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about those things. Last November, I brought my wife and my daughter back to Massachusetts for the hometown book signing, and I was able to show my daughter the path that my grandmother and I would walk. We'd walk 3 miles to get to Dunkin' Donuts. And she's like, "You walk 3 miles for Dunkin' Donuts?" And I was like, "Well,
Yeah.
at that time, like that was time I got to spend with Graham, and we would walk and we'd talk
Yeah.
about deep things, and it was just an awesome way for me to spend the day, even though my daughter now would think, "Oh, why would you walk 3 miles for a donut?" But it was a different time, and it was a different importance. But it was cool to be able to share that with her, that
Yeah.
this is what we did, and it was awesome. So my,
Yeah.
my grandmother
100%.
would tell me these stories like, that door song, she'd say that door song, "Hello, I love you. Won't you tell me your name?" She's like, "Kara, that is not real love. That is not how a girl should be spoken to. A boy
Yeah.
should know your name." I'm like, "Okay, point taken. Check off." Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just
But
so
it's
funny.
Yeah, it's true. It's like as much as the world has changed, it's like the power of storytelling will always remain there, even in all the different forms it takes nowadays with social media, how things are evolving. It's
Mhm.
still so nice to just have that time with an authentic story and get lost in the words and the chapters sometimes.
Sure. And now, like the world of social media is just another outlet to share it in a bigger venue, which is pretty darn cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. I
yeah,
imagine for you it's been with social media as well, how it's sort of evolving. It's probably been exciting because you'll see all these comments come in,
yeah.
and as well, I imagine, book signings must be a really exciting thing to do as well. Because I think it's one thing online, but when you have someone come up to you in person and they tell you their story or how it related to them, it must be a really rewarding feeling, right?
It is. And I'm surprised at how often I just start crying.
Yeah.
It's very emotional for me because it's such a close story. And then hearing how it is affecting someone else, someone I don't even know. It's just you would just want to grab them and hug them and just
Yeah.
bring them in, and it's really great.
Yeah.
Um, I feel so loved and so supported. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been really wonderful. And I just love meeting people, and a lot of people do come out and want to add to the story or ask a question about, hey, well, what happened here? Or you mentioned this guy.
Yeah.
Well, what was their story? And
Yeah.
sometimes you're surprised at how much people are paying attention. I'm like, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Did I forget that part? Okay. I'll put that in the second book. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Because people will pick up on things sometimes in a story that when you're writing it, even you might have not even thought that much about, but they'll be like, oh, I really related to this part because it really reminded me of my relationship with this person. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the really powerful things that can come out of it as well, how
Yeah.
people relate to it with their own stories. And I think when you kind of get to go on the road and out to, these events and book signings, it's it's got to be such an exciting feeling. I imagine it must have been a strange feeling at first to have it like out into the world, like the first day a book goes out, the first sort of book signing. But as it becomes more normal, and you get those connections and you get to hear about people's stories, it must, like you said, becomes very rewarding. There's so much you can get out
Yeah,
of it with, and so many connections you can make and friends along the way as well, I imagine.
for sure, for sure. Um, the first book club that I spoke at, it was at someone's apartment, and they invited me, and uh, it was in the South, so they wanted it to be a Southern dinner, but they wanted me to bring a bread pudding that was made from Dunkin' Donuts donuts. They thought that would be my good. So I'm
Yeah.
walking into this apartment carrying my Dunkin' Donuts bread pudding, and someone opens the
Yeah.
door, and they're like, "Oh, you're the author," and I was just, "Oh, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, that's me," and it was
Yeah.
really cool because all of these people had suddenly like stepped into my life. It was really
Yeah.
neat, and I was surprised at the questions they asked that I hadn't thought of. They're like, "Well, why didn't you put in more about your dad?" And
Yeah.
during the week, the book takes place the week of my grandmother's death. My dad was processing a lot, and he wasn't doing a lot of talking, and I think that's why I didn't put in a lot of conversations with him, because there weren't many at that time. Although we've
Yeah.
had many
Yeah.
since then.
Yeah.
But just hearing someone say that, I'm like, huh, yeah, I'll tell him that you said that,
Yeah.
and it's really kind
Yeah.
of neat.
Yeah. That's the thing though, in the moments, like the grief, I think hits so differently for everyone. And I imagine for you as well, like when you think about dealing with grief, like the process of writing, I think for you probably helped heal a lot of things. And so many different, because it's like when it comes to anything with loss, with grief, there's no guidebook, and it's things can just hit you out of nowhere. A memory can just, you
Yeah.
know, come out of the blue, and it can be a really fond memory or it can be really sad. And it's a hard one, I think, when it comes to navigating grief, but you've probably been able with this writing process and bringing this to life to do a lot of healing for yourself through the process, as hard as it probably was in the moment to
Yeah.
write a lot of the pages.
It was very hard. But I feel like about grief, like none of us are ever prepared, or
Yeah.
and you're right, there isn't a book about it, or well, I'm sure there are books about it, but like there's not a guidebook that's like, hey, this is how you should do it, and we all do it differently. um but I felt that me going through the grief and writing about it has helped other people go through their grief as well, because
Yeah.
sometimes you can get stuck or trapped, or and not keep through the stages of grieving. And I think
Yeah.
it's important to do that, um, for your own good, and for the good of the people around you too.
Yeah.
So I've,
So
I've
true.
found that this has been a nice tool for not only me, but for the people reading it, to help, just kind of shift gears somehow. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think, the power as well, having this book out there, is that it will exist forever. You think these memories will now be there forever out into the world, and people are always going to be finding it. There'll always be new ways for them to connect as well. So it's always going to be helping a lot of people in the future as well. So it's something very powerful that you've done in bringing this, you know, to life. And you think about, how happy she would be to have this in the world and to know that her story is being celebrated and resonating with so many people.
Yeah. Well, and I think also having a story out there, about someone we've lost, keeps them with us, keeps them
Yeah,
present,
absolutely.
keeps, their spirit alive. Um, I took my mom to a clairvoyant a couple of months ago, and my grandmother came through, and he asked her, "Well, do you like the story?" And she's like, "Well, yeah, I wrote it." So I was like,
Yeah,
"Okay."
yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it was
that's
it was really neat, and that was healing, because of course I wondered, "Oh, you like it? Are you mad about it?" She's okay. You
yeah.
came through me, even better. All right.
Yeah. No, that is so cool to have though, but it's like you said, it's having it out there now, it will connect with people and it continue to, you know, be inspiration for a lot of people navigating their own journeys as well. And for you as a writer, where would you see sort of this year going? What have you got planned next? Are you planning to do more writing in the future? Do you think you'll do? Because I remember you said before about going into fiction as well, right?
Yes. So I have one fiction book done, and
Yeah.
it's being considered by a publisher right now.
Oh,
Um,
exciting.
it was exciting because like you can just make stuff up, or I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, this lags here. What but yeah. So that's kind of
Yeah.
cool about fiction. Um, this year I have a bunch of events. I have a rainbow book fair coming up in 2 weeks. I have a conference in Albany in July. I might be playing drums with Allison Tucker also in July in Austin. That's a
Oh,
little bit in the air still, but that's kind of cool because I'm also a drummer.
yeah.
Um, and then we'll kind of see where it goes. I think my focus has been this year just kind of putting all of my energy into getting this book out there and giving it as much as I could. And then probably in a year and a half I'll sit down and start writing again. I do miss writing, but this kind of stuff is important, and as it's fresh out there it's important to get things moving in that direction. So
Yeah, definitely. And you've got to enjoy riding the wave, as well, and enjoying the process. Now it's out into the world and getting to experience all these events and meeting people as well. So I
yeah.
think it's great that you're having, this year to have, and I think it's very inspiring sometimes for future writing when you're going to these different events and meeting new people. It's like it gives you, I imagine, a lot of fuel for the future because it's always we all want to receive, compliments on our writing, our work, whatever we do. I think it gives us a lot of inspiration.
It does. And you also like meet these people that are in the same boat as you, and you realize, wow, we're not that different either. And how cool to have new friends,
Yeah,
new
so true.
support system. And it's been really nice. I've
Yeah,
really enjoyed, meeting a bunch of people from all over the world, which, you know,
yeah,
for me, I usually hold myself up in the bedroom with the morning light and my cup of coffee writing. It's very
yeah,
different, flying out to New Orleans and flying to New York City. And I was like, wow, okay, very different, but
yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they're all great experiences to have, aren't they? And I think there's so many people that are going to continue to reach out to you. You're going to continue to have so many people pop up and resonate with them. And for anyone who's listening today as well, where would you say we have listeners from all over the world, but where's the best place for them to buy the book? And if someone has any questions for you and wants to reach out, I'll add this in the comments below as well. But best place to reach you and best place for them to buy the book.
Okay. Best place to reach me, you can get on my website, www.karazajac.com. That's KARAZAJAC.com. There is a contact section in there where you can reach me and I'll always get it.
Yeah.
The best place to buy the book, you can buy it through my website or you can buy it on Amazon.com. The link for that is Amazon.com/DP/BOD6X676QX. And there are many formats. There's a hardcover, there's a Kindle, there's soft cover, and in a couple weeks, the Audible version is coming out.
Oh, exciting. Well, I
Yeah.
shall make sure that I put all those links in for our listeners to head to as well. And thank you so much today for joining me on the podcast. I know it's your first podcast that you've had, but it's been such a delight having you on, getting to hear about your story as well. I think for the listeners as well, a lot of them will really connect. And so I hope they will go and click the links. But thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, such a pleasure having you too. And so to all my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in and make sure you click the links below. So thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Perfect. I'll just do that. Okay.